Americans have to start decentering the military from our solution plans because the resistance part is an individual choice, and when you're in the military you are trained for foreign missions, right? The fact that he's moving that towards domestic means we're in an unprecedented scenario. I would say that the very events that people are calling bait events, like sending the National Guard to LA, to Chicago, all of these, even Washington DC, these are less of a test for the people and more of a test for the military to see how willing they are to comply and how much they're willing to comply with expanded, I guess, responsibilities beyond what they initially thought were like lawful to them. Because unless it is written somewhere as not allowed, does that mean that it's not allowed? But a lot of things are allowed that probably should not be, right? When it comes to like crime, like cannibalism, that's allowed, right? Well, not technically allowed, it's just not illegal, right? So there's a lot of possibility in that end to convince the military to be under tyranny, right? And to be the police, the military police of tyranny. So we have to allow for the military personnel to make a choice on an individual level. And I don't think that's going to happen because of these stress events where he's testing out how willing the military is to comply with him. And particularly the fact that more influx of members that go into the military, it's more likely that they have the same mentality as the one that, is in this administration, because that's probably why they want to join. So, really, what's going to make the military make that choice, I believe, is going to be that intersection of either a state or Americans reacting lawfully within the force meaning of our American blueprints when it comes to overreaching federal overreaching executive, right? That means that in that instant of conflict, the military personnel on an individual level have to decide what side they're on. Much more like South Korea, right? But more likely, I would say that they would have to choose as they see probably their battle buddies, wanting or mowing down innocent Americans. So ultimately, I believe it's going to be a reality in which these soldiers are going to question to themselves, am I going to go with the side that's fighting for the Constitution, right? Or for the side that is fighting for extended authority beyond the Constitution, right? Which is unconstitutional. So I've decentered my military assumptions in regards to whether or not they're going to follow unlawful orders, because unlawful is kind of very much pushing the reality, the fact that there's a lot of gaps and loopholes where you can make the military do something that wasn't deemed as unlawful before, right? So there's a lot of complexities there that I don't have control over, and most Americans don't have control over. At the end of the day, it's going to be a choice of every single individual, like military. But when it comes to our resistance, we have to decenter the military in regards to our fear of resistance, right? Because ultimately, every single society that has resisted against overreaching government has had to deal with that military capacity, right? And has had to find solutions to that end, right? It's not the safest, it's not the most ideal thing to do, but when they're removing your constitutional liberties, your constitutional protections, when they're trying to expand their authority beyond what's original, when they're trying to consolidate power and create tyranny beyond even their elected term, that's a reality in which we have to decide, do we want a continuance of terror or do we want an end of terror? And we cannot do that on the federal level. Can we do that on the state level? Can we do that on the regional level, right? Like the health alliances of the regions, like California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, and then on the other side, that's an example of soft secession, right? The states like California ending federal taxes, that is an example of soft secession, right? We don't have to have full secession. We just have to disconnect until the constitutional order is restored, and that's would be the most ideal demand, right? Restore it. What ways can they do that? Decenter the power that he's having, right? Also, the question of, if I'm disqualified, can I win? And if not, and if yes, isn't there supposed to be a vote or legislation that says as much, right? So restoring constitutional legitimacy involves restoring that judicial trust, right? And that's difficult because obviously it's consolidated. So we have to force that channel, that force that resolve, because at the federal level, Democrats have already banned because I don't think they have like the power, right? It's more likely that the shutdown probably won't happen because of people like Chuck Schumer, right? And rather than just being like, we're cooked, we have to find solutions, right? And those solutions are within fear but outside of fear, because our fear is that the military we have has capacity and will just wipe us out, but we have to think of the optics, right? If California resisted, which we are resisting, and the federal government just came over here and just mowed a bunch of Californians down, that's 40 million people, nearly 40 million people, that would be so disastrous, which governments don't like to do that because that ruins the illusion that you're democratic, that you're civil, that you're humane, right? So they're going to want you to self-censor and for you to stop yourself from resisting, right? Because you think it's going to invoke martial law. But literally removing Jimmy Kimmel and then even, St. Clair saying we're still not going to put him up, that's a version of martial law. You getting fired for saying that CK was an extremist is martial law, right? So ultimately, our biggest fears are already here, right? So in that recognition, each single American has that duty to decide, am I going to be on the side that fights for the constitutional restoration, or am I going to be on the side where my silence leads to the constitutional collapse? Because without the Constitution, we have no rights, we have no political rights, no guarantees. And without that, if there is no Constitution, which is what ratified the Union, is there a Union to begin with? And these are the questions that we have to ask because we see ourselves as not having any power because we are outnumbered when it comes to like military and all of that stuff. But we have constitution. We have that law. And that's not going to, save us from authoritarian law. That's not going to save us from that consolidation of power. But we know that under American theory, we have a blueprint that leads us to resistance, that leads us to lawful resistance, even at the maximum, which in fact is what's considered under 2A, is less about military, I would say, and more about the people coming together as a state to fight against that encroachment, right? Which is where I say that it's unprecedented, right? But this would kind of mean that, like, say, Governor Newsom would have to invoke emergency powers to create a militia outside of the National Guard. I would say made up of armed civilians, right? This is an example that's unprecedented, but is a last resort to defending the state. And these are the things that we have to think about. Not traditional, but like outside of tradition.